So collections, a collection is a opportunity in Data Cookbook to group a set of specifications together under an umbrella, and to talk about that set of specifications as a whole entity. For those of you who need a refresher on what a specification is a IData term that refers to a reporting object, a data reporting object. We use that word specification instead of using the word report, because the kinds of reporting objects that people interact with are much more complex and broader than just a simple report. There are data feeds, there are data extracts, there are dashboards, there are email listservs, and we have always felt that calling those things reports was doing a disservice to the complexity of the labels for those items. So we settled on this word selections, and now with collections you can group selections together and tell a story about those specifications, about that report set as a set. So I'm going to first demo that for you in our demo account. I'm going to talk about some use cases. We've had some interesting applications of the collections feature. Go through some examples. Talk about workflow and permissions. Collections are considered an object in Data Cookbook, and like other objects, your definitions, your specifications, your quality rules, they have a workflow that they move through from the point of suggestion or initiation through some review process to a final approved state. We'll take a look at what that workflow is like, or can be like. It's customizable, as are all of our workflows. Now we're going to spend a couple minutes on search and discovery. The indexing for the keywords in collections ties into the search and retrieval for specifications in some interesting ways, and I wanted to call that out for you because it does impact the findability or the discovery of your reporting objects. And in this demo account, I'm going to navigate over to a previously defined collection. So I find those collections nested under my specifications area, right? Two main content areas of Data Cookbook are your business glossary and your specification area, or collection of specifications. Browse collections has been added as a subset of specifications. So that's where you find it. So now that I'm in my browse collections area, it should be familiar to you. This is a interface that is the same on definitions and specs. You have your functional area drop down. You have collection type, kind of similar to spec type. You can define those types according to your institution. Our old friend data systems, this is the same drop-down box you see in specifications. Tool is a new feature, and that refers to a software tool or an application tool. It's an enhancement to the data systems opportunity and lets you call your, typically it's used in your reporting stack to talk about the tools that may be operating or may be used to address certain data systems. So I do not have any defined at this moment. And of course our friends tags, as you may recall, are, you can tag any of our objects, definition, spec, quality rule, etc. I'm going to keep using that word object, and when I use that word object, just as a reminder, I'm referring to that collection of all the pieces, content pieces of Data Cookbook. Anyway, you can tag any object, and that tag goes into a single bucket, and that tag list is available across all objects. So in my collections listing here, I have two right now. We're going to focus on the second one. This display looks very similar to the selections display, right? I have a little bit snippet of information here, and I have some interesting things on the right here. I have my functional area, and I have the listing of specifications right here prominently displayed that are linked to this collection. So let's take a look at the collection. It's called Student Recruitment Core Reports. And this is an example, a type of grouping where this department the admissions office has a set of reports that they, amongst themselves, refer to as the core reports. And they wanted to group those together amongst all the admissions reports that were in Data Cookbook. Let's say there were 20, that probably would be that high. Let's say there were 10 admissions reports in the Data Cookbook, and maybe just 4 or 5 were really the core ones that were used heavily. And they wanted to call that out as a collection. So it is similar to specification. There's a purpose and a description. So these are important fields. You can clue in to the consumer what's happening with this grouping. The purpose gives the scope from the time of suspect, an individual becomes a suspect for the institution, to the time they matriculate, so the entire life cycle of the student. And then in the description, it gives a clue about access, that you may see some things but not others. Okay. Let's look at the functionality. Functionality is the tab where you link reports or specifications to this particular collection. So I have 3. Notice I don't have the ability to add any more at this time because this particular collection has been approved and it's closed. And I have my workflow. Here's my workflow panel. It's closed, and so I can't add any more without versioning that collection. Okay. Under technical details, this is a little similar to the technical tab in specifications. And in the example in this case, there's a utilization of a single open-ended text box. And this report writer dumped, this is fictitious code, dumped all the code that was needed to pull the data from the given data system that is used to generate all these reports. So it's a way to communicate, here's how you pull all the data, and then of course these reports are the key reports that are run off of that extract, if you will. So that's the anatomy, if you will, of a collection. There's 3 simple tabs, and then there's our usual related information here on the right-hand side. These operate, you can manually relate definitions or other specifications if you wish. Okay. Okay, let's go back and look at the other collection. See, I sometimes slightly interchange spec with collection. Let's look at data sharing agreements. This is an alternative use case where we're seeing clients use the collection area as a way to gather policy related to their data management. So if you are using what are called data sharing agreements, this is a contract that's between a data owner and a data receiver, typically governing not an individual report, but governing a data extract or a data feed. So the assumption being that that receiver is going to take that feed, take that data set, and do something with it. Going to build a web application with it. Going to create a mini data set and run local reports off of that. So an organization, in order to govern that activity, creates these contracts, mini contracts called data sharing agreements. So they defined that as a collection. They use a template for that agreement. And when an individual, typically the receiver of this, I want an extract of X, Y, and Z data from financial aid, that person would come to the collection area, pull down a blank copy of the template, set up the meeting with the owner of that data, work through the template, answer the questions around, usually there's key answers or key questions around privacy and destruction of data, making multiple after use, making sure that it's stored in a safe place. Those are the kinds of things that are in an agreement. Then any reporting objects that are made using that agreement, there is a specification made with those deliverables, and the completed data sharing agreement is attached to that specification. So if you want to actually see the agreement that's in play for this data object, you go to the Attachments tab for that specification, and, well, there's my data sharing agreement. If I go back to Overview, I'm going to navigate back now to my collection. Here's my collection of data sharing agreements. Note that this particular report or reporting object is in two collections. You can dual assign. There can be a one-to-many relationship between a specification and the collections. So this is in two collections. I'm going to go back to my data sharing agreements. And you can see the purpose, talks about the governance issue, describes what the components are of this particular policy document. Functionality, again, is where you would begin to list. This list would probably grow substantially of the items that are utilizing a data sharing agreement. So I think it's an interesting approach to using collections as a policy area. An option would be, I chose to associate that completed data sharing agreement with the reporting object that it was governing. You could also not do that and instead list those individual signed agreements as attachments to the collection itself. I think it just depends on where you want those, where you want to collate that material. Okay. I think let's create a new collection. So this brings into play permissions. Permissions are inherited from what you have for specifications. I should say inherited. They piggyback. They're the same. If you are an editor of specifications and therefore have the permission to create a spec, you also have a permission to create a collection. The assumption being that person doing the specs would be the one intellectually who would decide they wanted a collection. So I go to create a collection, and I'm presented as usual with that opening blank screen, and I need to give it a name. I have some material prepared here. Let's call it the admissions pipeline. Here's my drop-down box. I select my type. I'm going to call it an operational report collection. And of course, here's my drop-down of my functional areas. I could dual assign here just as I can in other situations. I have my text of my purpose. And a good purpose will indicate what decisions are made based on these data objects and what offices are using these. So admission staff use these reports on a daily basis. I think it's helpful to note that the collection contains both operational and analytics reports. Let's take the description. Okay. Collection owner, I'm going to designate a woman who is the director of admissions, and there's my opportunity to tag it. I'm going to save that. So I've just kicked off the collections workflow, and I haven't sent it anywhere. I'm still in that first phase of proposing. So as the creator of that, I can give it one more look over, and is this what I would like to submit to the person who's going to review it? I have full editorial power at this point. I can add my specifications at this point if I have them. And I can add my technical information. I can edit it completely. So when I am finished, let's say I want to add, let's just add this one in, and let's add this one as well. So I'll add two. And when I'm ready, I'm going to submit this as a proposal to the report writers group, the report writers as a group. I'm an individual report writer. I've now just submitted that to the group for their further development. When they have finished with it, they can submit it for final review, And in this particular workflow, the person in charge of the final review is the manager of the BI unit. And so that person would have final overview of it and then could click the approve button and finish the process. And then we have an approved collection with the related specifications here and of course listed here. By making that relationship, each of these specifications automatically, even though it was already previously approved, it is now automatically associated with this collection, and this spec did not have to traverse a workflow in order to acknowledge its new inclusion into a collection. Those two workflows, collections and specifications, they operate completely independently of each other. Similar people, I think by business design, would be involved in those workflows simply by the business process, by the way reports are made and collected and organized. There's going to be some overlap there of people, but the workflows themselves are completely independent of each other. You can think about this in the same way that the workflows for definitions and specifications are completely independent of each other. So I can have unapproved specifications listed in my approved specification. Excuse me, I swapped those words. I can have unapproved specifications listed in my approved collection, which we find is that would happen. I'm good with the collection itself. I'm just not done with all the reports inside it. A few words on the order in which you want to pursue this. Because you associate the spec with the collection, this is the only place you can add a spec to a collection. You want to have those. I would personally go make my specifications, and when I'm done with those, or maybe not approved, but have at least started them, I would then go build my collection so that those specs would then be available for me to link when I was making that happen on the functionality page. You could do it in the reverse order. You just have to come back to the collection at some point and make that association. Okay. I wanted to show you a graphic of the workflow. We can actually look at it in the native environment. If I'm going to show workflow, as some of you know, I can open up that workflow panel. I can click on that workflow from within the panel and zip right on over to that workflow. And here's that same picture. This is the default workflow. You may, of course, customize it however you see fit. All the usual workflow features are available to you. You can route it by functional area. You can route it by data system. No, excuse me. Actually, you cannot route by data system because you have not identified a data system. Let's go back to data to collections. I take that back. You can route by data system because you do identify a data system. So you'll want to look at that and customize that workflow. You can only conditional on functional area. You can route by data system within the workflow, but you could only conditional at the very beginning by functional area. A little bit further on permissions. I had talked about how they are piggybacked onto the specification permissions. So this is a snippet of a user group called report writers, and I just took the top half of it here. You can see for people in this user group, the specifications area, they have editor permissions for all of the functional areas, which means they will have editor permissions for all of the collections in those functional areas. Let's talk about a couple more use cases that I'm aware of. Annual reports. People want to, an annual report is sometimes a printed publication or a PDF delivered publication, and now you can take each of those data visuals or charts in that annual report and document each one, and then pull it all together with a collection and call it the annual report. Fact books, kind of a similar annual report thing. Many schools have fact books. You can now pull those all those reporting objects together into a collection. See, iPads would be another. Any bundle of external reporting deliverables could now also be bundled into a collection. Complex dashboards. Sometimes a Tableau dashboard may have 2 or 3 or 4 very complex visual pieces to it, and now you can take each of those individually as a specification. We have always advised you to do that anyway and treat those as individual specs. Now with collections, you have the ability to also talk about that object at the comprehensive layer. Then we saw examples today of operational reports in bundled and useful ways. Maybe it could also be the monthly enrollment reports, quarterly reports that are delivered. A lot of different creative ways you can think of that would be useful to bundle report groupings. And of course, the use as a policy container. Okay, I'm going to pause there and see if there's any. Oh, search and discovery I wanted to talk about. This is interesting. So I'm going to focus on this keyword upstream because that's a unique keyword that only appears in my collection for, I believe it's for the policy. It's in the description of the policy, data sharing agreements. Here's the word upstream. That's the only place in the cookbook that that word appears. So if I'm on the collections page, I go to search and I search for upstream, I retrieve that one collection. No surprise there. It performs as you would expect. Interesting thing is that if I go to specs, browse specs, search for upstream, I retrieve the reports that are linked to the collection that has the word upstream in its description. Did you follow that? So by inference, I've retrieved this spec. The word, or by association through its participation, its inclusion in the collection, the word upstream doesn't appear in this spec. It was retrieved because this search box is indexing all the keywords for both spec and browse. Excuse me, spec and collection. Same is true with the search box on the Home tab. Remember that items in this home search must be approved in order to appear. But I do have that collection is approved. Notice that the results set don't retrieve any collections. They only retrieve definitions and specs. But that one, I have a hit because this specification is associated with a collection that contains the word upstream. So that collection material is discoverable as people are discovering and searching for specifications. And it is available on its own from the Browse Collections tab.